The sun was just beginning to rise over Riverview, painting the city in hues of orange and gold. Officer Maya Collins adjusted her crisp uniform in the rearview mirror of her patrol car. Today was her first solo shift after months of grueling training. Her badge gleamed on her chest, a symbol of the authority she'd worked so hard to earn. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, smoothing her ponytail. She stepped out of her car, boots clicking on the pavement as she took in the quiet streets of the Elmwood district. It wasn't the easiest beat, but Maya relished the challenge. She'd trained for this moment and was determined to prove she belonged. The radio crackled. All units, possible disturbance reported at Riverview Library. Male subject loitering near the entrance. Appears suspicious. Caller anonymous. Maya grabbed the radio. Unit 312 responding. En route. The drive to the library was short, but Maya's mind raced. Elmwood had a reputation, petty crime, occasional thefts, and tensions between the predominantly minority community and the police. Her instructors had drilled into her the importance of commanding respect in such areas. She replayed their words as she approached the scene, adrenaline sharpening her focus. At the library entrance, a man stood leaning against a lamppost, scrolling on his phone. He was dressed neatly in a blazer and slacks, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He seemed harmless, but Maya's training kicked in. She parked her car and stepped out, hand resting on her utility belt. "Sir," she called out, keeping her tone firm but polite. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" The man looked up, startled. Sure. What's going on?" Maya approached, noting his calm demeanor. "We received a report of suspicious activity in this area. What's your business here?" He raised an eyebrow, glancing at his phone. "I'm just waiting for my sister. She works at the clinic next door. We're grabbing breakfast. Do you have any ID on you?" Maya asked, her voice firming up. The man hesitated, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Why do you need to see my ID? I haven't done anything wrong." Maya's hand moved instinctively toward her belt. "Sir, this is a routine check. I need you to comply." The man raised his hands slightly, palms out. "Look, I don't want any trouble, but I don't think standing here waiting for someone is against the law." Her pulse quickened. To her, his tone felt challenging. She had been taught that hesitation or questioning authority could signal defiance. "Hands where I can see them," she snapped. "What? Are you serious?" the man asked, incredulous. He reached slowly toward his pocket. "I'm just getting my wallet to show you my—" "Stop." Maya's voice rose, sharp and commanding. She stepped closer, her other hand hovering near her holstered taser. "Do not make any sudden movements." The scene unfolded in seconds. By the time other pedestrians noticed, the man was in handcuffs, his phone and wallet scattered on the ground. Maya was breathless, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You're under arrest for resisting a lawful order," she said, almost mechanically, as she guided him toward the back seat of her patrol car. "What? Are you kidding me?" he exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. "I didn't resist anything. This is insane." Bystanders began recording with their phones, murmuring among themselves. A young woman emerged from the clinic next door, her face paling when she saw the man in cuffs. "Marcus," she called out, hurrying over. "What's going on?" The man, Marcus Harris, shook his head. "Angela, call Mom. Tell her I'm being arrested for waiting to have breakfast with you." The woman, Angela, turned to Maya, her voice shaking. "This is my brother. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Why are you arresting him?" "He refused to comply with instructions and made sudden movements," Maya replied, avoiding Angela's piercing gaze. "Please step back, ma'am." "You've got to be kidding me," Angela muttered, pulling out her phone to record. "This is a joke." Back at the station, Maya filed her report with confidence. She outlined the incident in terms that cast Marcus as uncooperative and potentially threatening. It was how she'd been trained to write reports, emphasize officer safety, highlight suspicious behavior, and maintain control of the narrative. But as she handed in the report, she noticed Sergeant Grant watching her from across the room, his brow furrowed. "What?" she asked defensively. Grant sighed. "Maya, I've been on this job for 20 years. You sure everything happened the way you said it did? Yes, she replied, her tone clipped. Why wouldn't it have? Grant didn't answer, but his expression lingered in Maya's mind long after she clocked out for the day. 2 days later, Maya's world began to unravel. Marcus Harris's case was assigned to Judge Ethan Reed, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for holding law enforcement accountable. During the preliminary hearing, Marcus' attorney presented footage from multiple angles, showing Marcus calmly complying with Maya's commands. Judge Reed's dark eyes bore into Maya as he asked, "Officer Collins, can you explain why your report contradicts this video evidence?" Maya felt the heat rise to her face. "Your Honor," the situation escalated quickly. "I perceived a threat and acted accordingly." Reed leaned back in his chair, his gaze never wavering. "We'll see. Clerk, I want Officer Collins' training records and body cam footage reviewed immediately." Maya's heart sank. By the end of the week, whispers of an internal investigation spread through the precinct. Other officers grew cautious around Maya, their conversations halting when she entered the room. Meanwhile, Marcus Harris's family had reached out to a prominent civil rights attorney who vowed to uncover the truth about what happened that morning outside the library. For Maya, what had started as a routine arrest now felt like a storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that threatened to expose much more than she could have imagined. The courtroom was packed, its hushed murmurs a stark contrast to the tension that thickened the air. The Harris family sat in the front row, their faces tight with determination. Marcus Harris sat between his mother, Camille, and his sister, Angela. His calm demeanor from the day of the arrest had been replaced by a mix of frustration and resolve. At the prosecution's table, Officer Maya Collins adjusted her uniform, her polished badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. She glanced nervously at her attorney, a public defender who had been hastily assigned to represent her during the preliminary hearing. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Ethan Reed entered the courtroom. The room stood in unison, all eyes fixed on the towering figure of the judge. Reed exuded authority, his black robe flowing as he took his seat at the bench. His reputation as a fair but unyielding adjudicator had preceded him, and today, his sharp gaze seemed to pierce through every lie before it was even spoken. "Be seated," Reed instructed, his deep voice cutting through the room's quiet hum. He leaned forward, scanning the docket before him. "We're here today for the preliminary hearing in the case of Harris versus the City of Riverview," Reed began. "The charges against the defendant have been dismissed, and we are now addressing the matter of procedural conduct during his arrest." The statement landed like a thunderclap in the room. Maya's stomach churned. She shot a glance at the prosecutor, who was now furiously flipping through his notes. Marcus' attorney, Janine Cole, rose from her seat. Her navy blue suit was pristine, her tone calm but firm as she began. "Your Honor, we intend to show that the arrest of Marcus Harris was not only unjustified but emblematic of a larger pattern of misconduct within the Riverview Police Department." Judge Reed raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim for a preliminary hearing, Ms. Cole. I hope you have the evidence to back it up." Cole nodded confidently. "We do, Your Honor. With the court's permission, we would like to present video evidence taken by bystanders and Officer Collins' own body camera." Reed gestured for her to proceed. As the lights dimmed and the first video began to play on the courtroom screen, the tension in the room thickened. The footage, taken from a bystander's phone, showed Marcus Harris standing outside the library, scrolling on his phone. The audio captured his initial surprise at being approached, followed by his calm attempts to explain his presence. The screen then cut to a second angle, recorded by another bystander. This video showed Maya approaching Marcus with her hand resting on her belt. The sharpness of her commands stood in stark contrast to Marcus' composed responses. The room grew quieter as the footage clearly showed Marcus slowly reaching for his wallet, announcing his intention to retrieve his ID. Cole paused the video, letting the still image hang in the air. Marcus with his hands halfway to his pocket, his expression calm but confused. "Your Honor," Cole said, her voice steady. "This is the exact moment Officer Collins claimed she perceived a threat. As the court can see, Mr. Harris's movements were neither sudden nor aggressive." Maya's throat tightened. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her attorney leaning over to whisper something she barely registered. Reed nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Cole, do you have any additional footage? Yes, Your Honor. We also have Officer Collins' body cam footage. The court watched as the video played. From Maya's perspective, the same interaction unfolded, but the audio now included her clipped commands. Hands where I can see them, Maya's voice barked through the courtroom speakers. The next few seconds played out exactly as the bystander videos had shown. No sudden movements, no aggression, just a calm man reaching for his wallet and being met with escalating force. When the video ended, the room was silent. Judge Reed looked toward Maya, his expression unreadable. Officer Collins, he said, his voice measured. Your report claims that Mr. Harris made a sudden, threatening movement that caused you to fear for your safety. How do you reconcile that statement with the video evidence we just reviewed? Maya's palms were clammy. She cleared her throat, willing her voice to stay steady. Your Honor, in the moment, it felt sudden. I had to make a split-second decision to ensure my safety. Reed leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on the edge of the bench. In the moment, Officer Collins, did you base your decision on what you saw or on what you assumed? Maya faltered. I acted based on my training. Reed nodded slowly. Then we'll need to take a closer look at that training. He turned his attention to the clerk. I want Officer Collins' full training records on my desk within the next 48 hours. Additionally, I am ordering a review of the body cam footage for all arrests conducted by Officer Collins in the last 6 months. Maya's heart sank. This was far worse than she'd anticipated. During the recess, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Maya sat stiffly in the hallway, her mind racing. Across from her, Marcus and his family spoke quietly with Cole. Angela glanced in Maya's direction, her eyes hard and unforgiving. Officer Collins, a voice said, snapping Maya out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Judge Reed standing nearby. For a moment, she felt exposed, as though he could see straight through her. Your Honor, she managed, standing to address him. Reed studied her for a moment, his expression stern but not unkind. This is your first solo patrol, isn't it? Yes, sir. I've seen many rookies in my time, Officer Collins. Some learn quickly that authority comes with responsibility. Others let their badge blind them to the humanity of those they serve. Which kind of officer are you going to be? Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. Reed nodded as though he'd expected her silence. Think carefully about your choices moving forward, Officer Collins. Justice doesn't end at this courtroom's doors. As Reed walked away, Maya sank back into her seat, the weight of his words pressing down on her. By the time the hearing resumed, Maya felt the ground beneath her shifting. Judge Reed concluded the session by officially dismissing all charges against Marcus Harris and ordering an internal investigation into Maya's precinct. This court will not tolerate falsehoods or abuses of power, Reed declared, his voice ringing out like a bell. If there is misconduct within the Riverview Police Department, it will be exposed. As the gavel fell, Maya realized this was no longer just about her. It was the beginning of something much larger, and there was no turning back. The morning air was heavy with tension as Officer Maya Collins parked her patrol car in the Riverview Police Department's lot. She hesitated before stepping out, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone was the confident rookie from just days ago. In her place stood someone on the verge of being swallowed by a storm. Inside the precinct, whispers followed her as she walked through the hallways. Conversations fell silent when she approached, and sidelong glances from fellow officers lingered longer than they should have. The investigation ordered by Judge Reed had shaken the department, and Maya's name was at the center of it. Maya, a voice called. She turned to see Sergeant Grant standing by the break room door, his expression unreadable. He gestured for her to follow him inside. Grant closed the door behind her, crossing his arms. Sit down, he said, his voice calm but firm. Reluctantly, Maya complied. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, Grant began. Did you falsify anything in that report about Marcus Harris? Maya's pulse quickened. No. I wrote what I thought happened. What you thought happened, Grant repeated, leaning against the counter. And now that you've seen the videos, does it match what you wrote? Maya opened her mouth but hesitated. I acted on my instincts. Grant sighed, rubbing his temples. Instincts aren't facts, Collins. Facts are what keep us accountable. That's why we have body cams and reports, to make sure our actions match reality. If they don't, people get hurt. Maya's defenses rose. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. No one ever does, Grant said, his voice softening. But intent doesn't erase impact. As the day wore on, Maya buried herself in routine calls, traffic stops, noise complaints, and assisting with a minor fender bender. Each interaction felt heavier, as though every civilian's gaze carried the weight of judgment. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The nervous glances people gave her uniform, the way they stiffened when she approached. By the afternoon, Maya found herself responding to a shoplifting call at a local grocery store. The suspect was a teenage boy, no older than 14, caught trying to steal a pack of granola bars. The store manager, a wiry man with a scowl permanently etched on his face, wasted no time venting his frustration. This little punk thinks he can just take whatever he wants and get away with it. The boy stood quietly, his hands trembling as he clutched the bars. "What's your name?" Maya asked, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "Caleb," he mumbled. "Why did you take these, Caleb?" He hesitated before whispering, I was hungry." Maya's stomach twisted. She glanced at the store manager. "You're pressing charges over granola bars?" "It's the principle of the thing," he snapped. Maya turned back to Caleb. "Where's your family?" He looked down, his voice barely audible. "My mom's working 2 jobs. She told me to wait until dinner, but—" Maya took a deep breath. "You're coming with me, Caleb." The boy's face fell, but Maya continued. "Not to the station. I'm taking you home." The manager started to protest, but Maya cut him off. "I'll pay for the bars." He's learned his lesson. Driving Caleb home, Maya listened as he spoke about his family. His mother worked long hours to make ends meet, leaving Caleb to fend for himself most days. When they arrived at his small apartment complex, Maya handed him the bag of granola bars. "Next time, just wait for dinner, okay?" Caleb nodded, his eyes wide with gratitude. As she drove away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that lingered. How many others like Caleb had she encountered but never truly seen? That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at the files spread before her. The precinct had started distributing training manuals and performance reports for review, as part of the investigation ordered by Judge Reed. Maya's eyes landed on one of the reports, written by Lieutenant Parker during her training. The words "sharp instincts" and "decisive action" were underlined, but beneath them, a note from Sergeant Grant caught her eye. "Shows potential but needs to work on situational awareness and de-escalation techniques. Recommend additional training." The note had been crossed out in red ink, replaced with Parker's handwriting. "Collins is ready. No further training required." Maya felt a chill run through her. Parker had overridden Grant's concerns. Why? The next morning, Maya was called into Parker's office. The lieutenant's desk was pristine, his demeanor as polished as ever. He gestured for her to sit down. "Maya," Parker began, folding his hands, "I hear the investigation has made you a topic of conversation around the precinct." Maya nodded cautiously. "Don't let it get to you," Parker continued. "This is just politics. Judge Reed wants to make a name for himself, and you're the scapegoat." "I don't think it's just politics," Maya said, her voice faltering. "I've been reviewing my training records. There are things that don't add up." Parker's smile tightened. "Your training was thorough. We equipped you to handle the realities of this city. You followed procedure. But what if the procedure is wrong?" Maya asked, her heart racing. Parker's expression hardened. "Watch yourself, Collins. Questioning the system isn't just dangerous, it's career suicide. You've got a promising future ahead of you. Don't ruin it by overthinking." Maya left the office feeling more unsettled than ever. Later that day, Maya received a text from an unknown number. "You're not alone. Meet me at Crescent Cafe at 6 p.m. OB." Maya hesitated before deciding to go. When she arrived at the cafe, she spotted a woman in her 30s with a notebook and a laptop. "You must be Officer Collins," the woman said, extending her hand. "Olivia Brooks. I'm a journalist." Maya stiffened. "I shouldn't be here." I think you should, Olivia countered. I've been looking into Riverview PD for months. Your case is the crack in the dam. If you have any doubts about what's happening, I can help you find the truth. Maya hesitated, torn between loyalty to her department and the growing suspicion that something was deeply wrong. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Olivia's eyes gleamed with determination. Just the truth. Maya didn't answer immediately, but for the first time, she wondered if the truth was what she needed, too. The morning air was heavy with tension as Officer Maya Collins parked her patrol car in the Riverview Police Department's lot. She hesitated before stepping out, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone was the confident rookie from just days ago. In her place stood someone on the verge of being swallowed by a storm. Inside the precinct, whispers followed her as she walked through the hallways. Conversations fell silent when she approached, and sidelong glances from fellow officers lingered longer than they should have. The investigation ordered by Judge Reed had shaken the department, and Maya's name was at the center of it. Maya, a voice called. She turned to see Sergeant Grant standing by the break room door, his expression unreadable. He gestured for her to follow him inside. Grant closed the door behind her, crossing his arms. Sit down, he said, his voice calm but firm. Reluctantly, Maya complied. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, Grant began. Did you falsify anything in that report about Marcus Harris? Maya's pulse quickened. No. I wrote what I thought happened. What you thought happened, Grant repeated, leaning against the counter. And now that you've seen the videos, does it match what you wrote? Maya opened her mouth but hesitated. I acted on my instincts. Grant sighed, rubbing his temples. Instincts aren't facts, Collins. Facts are what keep us accountable. That's why we have body cams and reports, to make sure our actions match reality. If they don't, people get hurt. Maya's defenses rose. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. No one ever does, Grant said, his voice softening. But intent doesn't erase impact. As the day wore on, Maya buried herself in routine calls, traffic stops, noise complaints, and assisting with a minor fender bender. Each interaction felt heavier, as though every civilian's gaze carried the weight of judgment. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The nervous glances people gave her uniform, the way they stiffened when she approached. By the afternoon, Maya found herself responding to a shoplifting call at a local grocery store. The suspect was a teenage boy, no older than 14, caught trying to steal a pack of granola bars. The store manager, a wiry man with a scowl permanently etched on his face, wasted no time venting his frustration. This little punk thinks he can just take whatever he wants and get away with it. The boy stood quietly, his hands trembling as he clutched the bars. What's your name? Maya asked, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. Caleb, he mumbled. Why did you take these, Caleb? He hesitated before whispering, I was hungry. Maya's stomach twisted. She glanced at the store manager. You're pressing charges over granola bars? It's the principle of the thing, he snapped. Maya turned back to Caleb. Where's your family? He looked down, his voice barely audible. My mom's working 2 jobs. She told me to wait until dinner, but Maya took a deep breath. You're coming with me, Caleb. The boy's face fell, but Maya continued. Not to the station. I'm taking you home. The manager started to protest, but Maya cut him off. I'll pay for the bars. He's learned his lesson. Driving Caleb home, Maya listened as he spoke about his family. His mother worked long hours to make ends meet, leaving Caleb to fend for himself most days. When they arrived at his small apartment complex, Maya handed him the bag of granola bars. Next time, just wait for dinner, okay? Caleb nodded, his eyes wide with gratitude. As she drove away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that lingered. How many others like Caleb had she encountered but never truly seen? That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at the files spread before her. The precinct had started distributing training manuals and performance reports for review, as part of the investigation ordered by Judge Reed. Maya's eyes landed on one of the reports, written by Lieutenant Parker during her training. The words sharp instincts and decisive action were underlined, but beneath them, a note from Sergeant Grant caught her eye. Shows potential but needs to work on situational awareness and de-escalation techniques. Recommend additional training. The note had been crossed out in red ink, replaced with Parker's handwriting. Collins is ready. No further training required. Maya felt a chill run through her. Parker had overridden Grant's concerns. Why? The next morning, Maya was called into Parker's office. The lieutenant's desk was pristine, his demeanor as polished as ever. He gestured for her to sit down. Maya, Parker began, folding his hands. I hear the investigation has made you a topic of conversation around the precinct. Maya nodded cautiously. Don't let it get to you, Parker continued. This is just politics. Judge Reed wants to make a name for himself, and you're the scapegoat. I don't think it's just politics, Maya said, her voice faltering. I've been reviewing my training records. There are things that don't add up. Parker's smile tightened. Your training was thorough. We equipped you to handle the realities of this city. You followed procedure. But what if the procedure is wrong? Maya asked, her heart racing. Parker's expression hardened. Watch yourself, Collins. Questioning the system isn't just dangerous, it's career suicide. You've got a promising future ahead of you. Don't ruin it by overthinking. Maya left the office feeling more unsettled than ever. Later that day, Maya received a text from an unknown number. You're not alone. Meet me at Crescent Cafe at 6 p.m. OB. Maya hesitated before deciding to go. When she arrived at the cafe, she spotted a woman in her 30s with a notebook and a laptop. You must be Officer Collins, the woman said, extending her hand. Olivia Brooks. I'm a journalist. Maya stiffened. I shouldn't be here. I think you should, Olivia countered. I've been looking into Riverview PD for months. Your case is the crack in the dam. If you have any doubts about what's happening, I can help you find the truth. Maya hesitated, torn between loyalty to her department and the growing suspicion that something was deeply wrong. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Olivia's eyes gleamed with determination. Just the truth. Maya didn't answer immediately, but for the first time, she wondered if the truth was what she needed, too. The protests outside the Riverview Police Department grew louder as the week went on. Signs demanding accountability waved in the air, and chants echoed across the parking lot. Inside, the tension among the officers was palpable. Conversations were hushed, and every sideways glance carried a hint of suspicion. Maya Collins walked through the precinct with her head held high, but each step felt heavier than the last. Lieutenant Parker's office door slammed open, and his voice carried across the squad room. Collins, my office. Now. Maya hesitated before entering. Parker was pacing, his face flushed with anger. On his desk sat a printout of the latest article by Olivia Brooks. Care to explain this? Parker jabbed a finger at the headline. The Shield's Web, uncovering a culture of corruption in Riverview PD. I don't know what you mean, sir, Maya said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Parker leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Don't play dumb with me, Collins. I know you've been talking to someone. The timing is too convenient. You think you can just stab this department in the back and walk away clean? Maya clenched her fists. I haven't stabbed anyone in the back. Maybe the problem isn't the truth coming out. It's what the truth reveals. Parker's face darkened. Watch your tone, officer. If you want to keep that badge, you'll stay in line. The veiled threat hung in the air. Maya turned and left without another word, her heart pounding in her chest. Later that day, Agent Monica Torres called Maya to meet at a secure location. The two sat in a quiet conference room at the Federal Building, documents spread across the table. We've uncovered a lot, Torres said, pointing to a chart detailing connections between Riverview PD and other departments. But we need more from you, specifically about Parker's involvement. Any direct orders, patterns of behavior, or communication you can recall. Maya hesitated. Parker doesn't leave much of a paper trail. He's careful. But Torres raised an eyebrow. Go on. There's a private server, Maya admitted. I overheard him talking about it once with Lopez. It's where they store files they don't want anyone finding, training materials, body cam edits, things like that. Torres nodded. That's the kind of lead we need. Can you access it? Maya hesitated, the weight of the request pressing down on her. I can try. Good, Torres said, leaning back. But be careful. If Parker suspects anything, it could get dangerous. That night, Maya sat in her apartment, staring at her computer. The tension in her shoulders was unbearable. The flash drive Torres had given her rested on the desk, its presence a stark reminder of the risk she was about to take. After a long breath, she accessed the precinct's network remotely, using credentials she'd memorized during her training. Navigating through the files, she found a hidden folder buried deep in the system. Her pulse quickened as she clicked on it. The folder contained training materials labeled with phrases like advanced tactics and incident narrative development. The documents detailed how to write reports that emphasized officer safety while downplaying civilian harm. There were also spreadsheets tracking arrest quotas, noting increases in promotions and bonuses for officers who met or exceeded them. Maya copied everything onto the flash drive, her hands shaking. As she logged out, she prayed no one had noticed the activity. The next morning, Maya handed the flash drive to Torres in a secluded parking lot. Torres plugged it into her laptop and scanned the files, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. "This is exactly what we needed," Torres said. "This ties Parker and his network directly to the systemic issues we've been investigating. You've just opened the door for a full-scale federal inquiry." Maya nodded, but the weight of her actions bore down on her. She wasn't just exposing Parker. She was exposing herself to retaliation from a system that wouldn't go down quietly. The fallout was swift. Within 48 hours, federal agents raided the Riverview precinct, seizing computers, documents, and even Parker's personal laptop. Officers whispered nervously as agents combed through every corner of the building. Parker was livid. He stormed through the precinct, barking orders and demanding answers. His rage was barely contained when he confronted Maya in the squad room. "Collins," he snarled. "What the hell is going on?" "Looks like accountability," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. Parker stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "You think this is over? You think you're safe? You don't know what you've started." Maya held his gaze. "I know exactly what I've started." The public response to the raid was explosive. News outlets covered the federal investigation extensively, with Olivia Brooks leading the charge. Her latest article, "The Shield Crumbles. Inside the Fall of Riverview PD," highlighted the evidence Maya had provided, though her identity remained anonymous. Protests outside the precinct grew larger, with community leaders demanding not just accountability but systemic reform. Marcus Harris and his family were among the speakers at a rally, sharing their story and calling for justice. "We're not just here for my brother," Angela Harris said, her voice firm as she addressed the crowd. "We're here for everyone who's been silenced, mistreated, and ignored. This isn't just about one bad officer or one bad precinct. It's about changing the entire system." As the investigation deepened, Torres asked Maya to testify in a closed federal hearing. The thought of facing a panel of government officials made her stomach churn, but she knew it was necessary. Seated in the sterile hearing room, Maya recounted everything she knew: her training, Parker's influence, the quotas, and the secret files. Her voice faltered at times, but Torres' encouraging nods kept her going. When she finished, one of the federal prosecutors leaned forward. "Officer Collins, do you understand the gravity of what you've shared today?" "Yes," Maya said quietly, "and I understand my role in it. I didn't stop it when I should have. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." That evening, Maya returned home to find a note taped to her door. The handwriting was scrawled and uneven. "Snitches get what's coming to them." Her breath caught as she crumpled the paper in her hand. Fear coursed through her, but it was accompanied by a flicker of resolve. She was in too deep to back out now. For Maya, there was no turning back. The fight for justice had begun, and she was determined to see it through, even if it meant losing everything. The tension inside Riverview Police Department was suffocating. Maya Collins walked through the precinct, acutely aware of the glares from her fellow officers. Conversations ceased as she passed, and every glance felt like a silent accusation. The federal raid had turned the precinct into a battlefield, with everyone scrambling to save themselves. At her desk, Maya found an envelope with no name. She opened it cautiously, revealing a photograph of her family home. Beneath it, The words were scrawled in red ink, "Stay silent, or they'll pay the price." Her hands trembled as she shoved the photo into her desk drawer. The threats were getting more personal, more direct. She glanced at Sergeant Grant, who was watching her from across the room. "You okay?" he mouthed silently. Maya nodded, though the tightening in her chest told a different story. That afternoon, Maya met with FBI agent Monica Torres in a secure location. Torres leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, as Maya recounted the latest threat. "They're scared," Torres said, her voice calm. "That's why they're coming after you. It means we're close." "They threatened my family," Maya snapped. "This isn't just about me anymore." Torres leaned forward, her tone softening. "I understand how personal this feels, but this is how we take them down. If you back out now, they win. You've already made it this far, Collins. Don't stop." Maya swallowed hard, the weight of Torres' words settling over her. "What's next?" "We need your testimony," Torres said. "A formal deposition. It'll be sealed for now, but once the indictments come, you'll likely be called to testify in court." The thought of publicly testifying made Maya's stomach churn, but she nodded. "I'll do it." The next day, Maya sat in a federal office, staring at the recorder in front of her. Torres and a federal prosecutor, Julian Park, sat across the table, their expressions firm but encouraging. "Officer Collins," Park began, "this deposition is a critical step in building our case against Lieutenant Parker and the broader network. Take your time and tell us everything you know." Maya took a deep breath and began. She spoke about her training, how Parker had pushed her and other rookies to prioritize arrests over de-escalation. She described the secret server where incriminating files were stored, the fabricated reports, and the edited body cam footage. Her voice shook as she admitted her role in targeting civilians like Marcus Harris, painting them as threats to justify unnecessary arrests. When she finished, Park leaned forward. "Do you believe the actions you described were systemic or isolated to Parker's leadership?" "Systemic," Maya said without hesitation. "Parker was just one piece of it. Other officers, other precincts, they were all connected. It wasn't about one bad apple. The whole orchard is rotten." Later that evening, Maya returned home exhausted, but there was no time to rest. Her phone buzzed with a call from Olivia Brooks. "I just got a tip," Olivia said. "Parker's been meeting with some high-level contacts. I think they're trying to coordinate a defense, or worse, a cover-up." "Do you know where?" Maya asked. "An abandoned warehouse on the east side of town," Olivia replied. "It's where they've had meetings before. Torres might want to check it out." The next night, Torres led a team of agents to the warehouse. Maya insisted on coming along, despite Torres' objections. "This isn't your fight anymore," Torres said as they prepped in the van. "It's always been my fight," Maya countered. Torres sighed but relented. The warehouse was dark and quiet, its exterior giving no hint of the activity inside. Torres and her team moved silently, their weapons drawn. Maya stayed behind, listening to the crackle of their radios. "Entry clear," Torres' voice came through. Minutes passed like hours before Torres returned, holding a laptop. "We got what we needed," she said, her face grim. "What's on it?" Maya asked. "Parker's communications with other precincts," Torres replied. "It's confirmation of everything you've been saying. This isn't just Riverview. It's a network spanning multiple states." The following morning, Riverview PD was in chaos. Federal agents arrested Lieutenant Parker in his office, hauling him out in handcuffs as officers and reporters watched. Parker's face was a mask of fury as he was led past Maya. "This isn't over, Collins," he spat. "You think you're a hero? You're just a pawn." Maya met his gaze, her voice steady. "Maybe, but at least I'm not a coward." As news of Parker's arrest spread, Maya became both a pariah and a reluctant hero. Officers who had once been her friends now treated her with open hostility. Even Sergeant Grant seemed more distant, as though her whistleblowing had drawn an invisible line between them. "You did the right thing," Grant said one evening, stopping her as she left the precinct. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing everything?" Maya asked. "Because you are," Grant admitted. "But some things are worth losing everything for." The climax of the week came when Torres called Maya to the federal courthouse. A grand jury had been convened to review the evidence against Parker and the broader network. Maya's testimony would be a key component of the case. The courtroom was packed with lawyers, agents, and journalists. Maya took the stand, her palms sweating as she swore to tell the truth. Park led the questioning, guiding her through her training, her actions, and her eventual realization of the corruption within the department. When he asked her why she decided to come forward, Maya paused, her voice breaking slightly. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. People like Marcus Harris deserve justice. And I realized I was part of a system that took that from them. I can't undo what I've done, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. By the end of the hearing, the grand jury indicted Parker and several other officers connected to the network. The charges ranged from obstruction of justice to conspiracy to violate civil rights. As Maya left the courthouse, she was swarmed by reporters. Cameras flashed, and microphones were shoved in her face. "Officer Collins, do you have any comment about today's indictment?" one reporter asked. Maya paused, her mind racing. Finally, she said, "This isn't about me. It's about accountability. And it's only the beginning." That night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on how far she'd come. She wasn't the same officer who had put Marcus Harris in handcuffs weeks ago. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. And she wasn't turning back. The Riverview precinct felt like a war zone. After Lieutenant Parker's arrest, the chain of command was in disarray, and whispers of fear and anger filled the halls. For Officer Maya Collins, every shift felt like walking on a knife's edge. Colleagues who once shared jokes with her now avoided eye contact or muttered insults under their breath. "Snitch," Lopez hissed as Maya passed him in the hallway. Maya ignored him, though her chest tightened. The hostility was unrelenting. Every glance, every murmured comment reminded her of how deeply she had betrayed the unspoken code of silence. Later that day, Maya was called into Captain Sinclair's office. Sinclair, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had taken temporary command after Parker's arrest. "Collins, sit," Sinclair said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Maya sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap. Sinclair studied her for a moment before speaking. "You've caused quite a stir." "I did what was necessary," Maya replied, her tone even. "I'm not here to judge your actions," Sinclair said, "but you've made a lot of enemies. The officers under this roof may not trust you, and frankly, I can't guarantee your safety." Maya's heart sank. "So what now?" Sinclair leaned back in her chair. "The FBI has requested full access to our records and operations. They'll be conducting interviews with every officer, and you'll need to cooperate. In the meantime, I'm reassigning you to desk duty." "Desk duty?" Maya repeated, her voice tinged with frustration. "For your protection," Sinclair said firmly. "You've made yourself a target, Collins. Don't make it worse." That evening, Maya returned home to find her car vandalized. The windshield was shattered, and spray paint covered the sides, spelling out words like traitor and rat. Her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, peeked out from her front door, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay, dear?" "I'm fine," Maya lied, her voice shaking. As she called the police to report the vandalism, a sinking feeling settled in her chest. How could she trust the very system she had exposed? The next day, Maya met with Agent Monica Torres at the Federal Building. Torres noticed the dark circles under Maya's eyes. "Rough night?" Torres asked. "You could say that," Maya replied. "My car got vandalized, and I'm getting threats almost daily now. How much longer do I have to live like this?" Torres leaned forward. "I won't lie to you, Collins. This isn't going to end anytime soon. But we're making progress. Parker's arrest has opened up a floodgate. Officers from other precincts are starting to come forward, and we're building a stronger case every day." "That's great," Maya said dryly. "Meanwhile, I can't even park my car without wondering if it'll still be there in the morning." Torres softened her tone. "I know it's hard, but what you're doing matters. The more you push, the more the system fights back. That's how you know you're hitting a nerve." Maya nodded, though the words offered little comfort. Over the next few weeks, the FBI's investigation expanded. More officers were implicated, and new evidence revealed the extent of the corruption network. Training programs in neighboring precincts mirrored those in Riverview, with similar tactics for manipulating evidence and targeting vulnerable communities. Maya, now relegated to desk duty, spent her days organizing files and fielding calls from civilians. It was monotonous work, but it gave her time to reflect. One afternoon, as she sifted through a stack of old training records, she found a memo from years ago. It was a warning from a former officer, detailing concerns about the culture of the department. The memo was addressed to then-Captain Robert Drake. Maya frowned. Drake had been a mentor to Parker before retiring under mysterious circumstances. She scanned the memo further and found notes in the margin, written in red ink. Dismissed. No action required. Maya's pulse quickened. This memo was a smoking gun, a record of concerns that had been deliberately ignored. She copied the document and immediately forwarded it to Torres. That evening, Maya received a call from Olivia Brooks. "I've been digging into Parker's history," Olivia said. "Turns out, he wasn't just trained in Riverview. He spent time in 2 other precincts with similar corruption complaints." "Let me guess," Maya said. "Drake was involved?" "Bingo," Olivia confirmed. Drake was instrumental in setting up training programs in all 3 precincts. He retired just before the first internal investigation was launched. If we can connect him to the broader network, this whole thing could blow wide open. The next day, federal agents raided Drake's home. They seized computers, files, and financial records, uncovering payments from private security firms tied to the corruption network. It became clear that Drake had helped build a multi-state system of misconduct, profiting from his involvement even after retirement. The news of Drake's role sent shockwaves through the city. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, and protests outside the precinct grew louder. Maya's role in the investigation became public when an anonymous source leaked her name to the press. Overnight, she became a polarizing figure. Some hailed her as a hero for exposing the corruption, while others vilified her as a traitor to law enforcement. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages. One voicemail stood out, a message from Marcus Harris. "Officer Collins," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "I saw the news. I don't know if I'll ever forgive what you did to me, but I respect that you're trying to make things right. Keep going." Maya replayed the message several times, tears welling in her eyes. By the end of the week, Drake was arrested on federal charges, and the investigation expanded to include more precincts across 3 states. The corruption network, once thought to be localized, was revealed to be a sprawling web of abuse and manipulation. As Maya sat in a quiet corner of the precinct, staring at her empty desk, she realized the battle was far from over. The system was crumbling, but the work of rebuilding it had only just begun. Sergeant Grant approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done something important, Collins. Don't forget that." Maya nodded, though the weight of her choices still pressed heavily on her. For better or worse, she had chosen her path, and there was no turning back. The Riverview Federal Courthouse was packed to capacity. Journalists lined the back rows, cameras poised to capture the climax of the growing corruption scandal. Community members filled the seats, some clutching signs calling for justice. Others wore somber expressions, representing families still grappling with the fallout of systemic abuse. Maya Collins sat near the front, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was no longer the rookie officer who had walked into the precinct with ambition burning in her chest. Today, she was a witness, a key figure in a trial that would determine the fate of Lieutenant Parker and expose the network that had quietly operated for years. The courtroom doors swung open, and a hush fell over the room as Lieutenant Parker was led inside, flanked by federal agents. His jaw was set, and his eyes scanned the crowd with steely resolve. "Please rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as Judge Cynthia Ellis, a woman with a reputation for being both meticulous and unflinching, entered and took her seat at the bench. "This court is now in session," Judge Ellis said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We are here to address charges against Lieutenant Jonathan Parker, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and evidence tampering." The prosecution began its case with Agent Monica Torres taking the stand. She detailed the months-long investigation that had led to the indictment of Parker and others in the Riverview Police Department. Lieutenant Parker was not operating alone, Torres explained. He was part of a larger network known as the Shield, which trained officers in manipulating evidence, targeting vulnerable communities, and protecting those within their circle from accountability. The prosecution presented damning evidence: emails detailing arrest quotas, body cam footage showing altered timestamps, and financial records linking Parker to private contractors like Blue Line Security Solutions, which profited from the corruption. Maya's stomach churned as each piece of evidence was revealed. She had seen glimpses of this during her time in the precinct, but the full scope was staggering. The next witness was Officer Lopez, Parker's former confidant. He had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. On the stand, his cocky demeanor was replaced with a somber tone. "Parker trusted me," Lopez said. "He told me how to write reports, how to phrase things to protect ourselves if anything went wrong. He said we weren't just enforcing the law, we were controlling the narrative." When the prosecutor asked Lopez about Maya's involvement, he hesitated. Collins was one of Parker's star recruits, Lopez admitted. He saw potential in her, someone who could follow orders and play by his rules. "But I think she got in too deep before she realized what was really going on." Maya's turn to testify came next. She took the stand, her heart pounding in her chest. She swore to tell the truth, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Officer Collins," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your training under Lieutenant Parker?" Maya nodded. "From the beginning, we were taught to prioritize authority. Parker emphasized controlling situations, even if it meant escalating unnecessarily. He encouraged us to view certain communities as inherently dangerous." "Did you ever question these methods?" "At first, no," Maya admitted. "I was new, and I wanted to succeed. But as time went on, I started to notice things that didn't sit right. Reports that didn't match what I saw, body cam footage that was edited. By the time I realized how deep it went, I felt trapped." The prosecutor moved to a more personal line of questioning. "Can you tell the court about your arrest of Marcus Harris?" Maya swallowed hard, glancing at Marcus, who sat with his family in the gallery. His expression was unreadable. "I was responding to a call about suspicious activity," Maya said. "When I arrived, I saw Marcus standing outside the library. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but I made assumptions based on what I'd been taught. I escalated the situation when I didn't need to, and I arrested him without cause." "And what happened after the arrest?" "I filed a report," Maya said, her voice cracking slightly. "I framed it to justify my actions. But when the videos came out, it was clear that my report didn't match the truth." The prosecutor nodded. "Why did you choose to come forward?" Maya took a deep breath. "Because people like Marcus deserve justice. Because the system I was part of was broken, and I was helping to break it more. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." During cross-examination, Parker's defense attorney tried to undermine Maya's credibility. "You were complicit in the very system you're now condemning," he said, his tone sharp. "Isn't that true?" "Yes," Maya replied, her voice unwavering. "I made mistakes, terrible ones. But I'm here now, telling the truth. Can Parker say the same?" The courtroom murmured at her response, and the judge rapped her gavel for order. The trial continued with testimony from victims of the corruption network. Marcus Harris was among them. "When I was arrested," Marcus said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I thought my life was over. I was humiliated in front of my family and my community. I lost my job. I lost my faith in the people who were supposed to protect us. But seeing Officer Collins come forward gives me hope that maybe things can change." His words hung heavy in the air, and Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. The trial's final day brought Captain Robert Drake to the stand. Arrested weeks earlier, Drake's testimony revealed the depth of the conspiracy. "We created a system," Drake admitted, "one that rewarded loyalty over integrity, power over justice. Parker wasn't just following orders, he was expanding what we built." His testimony sealed the prosecution's case. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Parker's face remained stoic, but his shoulders sagged as the reality of his convictions set in. Judge Ellis delivered a scathing statement during sentencing. This case is a reminder that those entrusted with authority must be held to the highest standards. Lieutenant Parker betrayed the public's trust, and this court will ensure that betrayal is met with justice. Parker received 25 years in federal prison. As the court adjourned, Maya stepped outside into a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in her face, and questions were shouted from every angle. "Officer Collins, how do you feel about the verdict?" Maya paused, her voice steady as she answered. "This is just the beginning. Accountability isn't the end goal. Rebuilding trust is. That's the real work." From the crowd, Marcus Harris caught her eye. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of her efforts. For Maya, the courtroom battle was over, but the fight for justice had only just begun. The fallout from Lieutenant Parker's conviction rippled through Riverview and beyond. News outlets hailed it as a landmark case, and activists called for sweeping reforms in law enforcement practices. But for Officer Maya Collins, the verdict was just the first step in a much longer journey. A journey that would test her resolve and force her to confront the very community she had wronged. Weeks after the trial, Maya found herself in a packed auditorium at Riverview Community Center. The space was filled with residents, activists, and local leaders, all gathered for a public forum on police reform. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with both frustration and cautious hope. At the front of the room sat a panel that included federal agents, city officials, and Sergeant Grant. Maya sat off to the side, trying to remain inconspicuous, but her presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Murmurs followed her, and more than one pair of eyes glared in her direction. The moderator, a local pastor named Reverend Jackson, addressed the crowd. "We're here today to talk about how we move forward, how we rebuild trust between law enforcement and this community. But first, we must acknowledge the harm that's been done." Angela Harris stood up, holding a microphone. Her voice was steady but carried an edge of anger. "Harm is an understatement. My brother was treated like a criminal for standing outside a library. And he's not the only one. How do we trust a system that sees us as threats instead of people?" Applause erupted, and Maya's chest tightened. Reverend Jackson nodded. "Ms. Harris, your frustration is justified. But let's hear from someone who has seen the system from the inside. Officer Collins, would you like to speak?" Maya froze, the weight of every gaze in the room bearing down on her. Slowly, she stood and walked to the microphone. Her voice shook at first, but she steadied herself. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began. "What I did to Marcus Harris was wrong. What this department has done to this community is wrong. There's no excuse for it, and I'm not here to make one. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to help fix what's broken." A man in the back shouted, "How can we trust you now?" Maya met his eyes. "You can't. Not yet. Trust has to be earned, and I know I haven't earned it, but I'm willing to put in the work to make this right." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Angela spoke again, her voice softer this time. "What does that work look like to you?" Maya took a deep breath. "It looks like changing how we train officers, how we handle complaints, and how we're held accountable. It looks like listening to the people we're supposed to serve, not treating them as enemies. And it looks like owning up to our failures, starting with me." After the forum, Maya approached Marcus Harris, who stood with his family. She hesitated before speaking. "Marcus, Don't," Marcus said, holding up a hand. His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. "You've said enough for one night." Maya nodded, swallowing her disappointment. "I understand. I just want you to know I'm trying to do better." Angela stepped forward. "If you're serious about that, you'll need more than words. Actions matter." Maya nodded again. "You're right. They do." The next day, Maya began a new assignment, working with a task force dedicated to implementing reforms in the Riverview Police Department. The team included community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and even former officers who had come forward during the investigation. Their first task was to overhaul officer training programs. Maya sat in meetings where old lesson plans were dissected and rewritten. The emphasis shifted from aggressive tactics to de-escalation and cultural competency. "It's not enough to tell officers what to do," Maya said during one meeting. "We need to show them why it matters." They need to understand the impact of their actions on real people. Maya also participated in ride-alongs with new recruits, offering guidance based on her own mistakes. During one patrol, a young officer hesitated before approaching a group of teens outside a corner store. "Think about why you're stopping them," Maya said. "Is it because they're doing something wrong? Or because you've been taught to see them as suspicious?" The recruit frowned, lowering his hand from his belt. "They're not doing anything illegal." "Exactly," Maya replied. "Sometimes, the best decision is to walk away." As the months passed, Maya found herself becoming a fixture at community events. She volunteered at food drives and youth programs, trying to rebuild the bridges she had once helped burn. One afternoon, while helping set up for a neighborhood cleanup, she saw Angela Harris walking toward her. "You keep showing up," Angela said, crossing her arms. "I have to," Maya replied. "If I want to help fix this, I can't do it from a distance." Angela studied her for a moment before nodding. "We'll see if it sticks." The broader reforms began to take hold as well. New policies required independent oversight of all use-of-force incidents. A civilian review board was established with real authority to investigate complaints. Body camera footage was uploaded to secure, third-party servers to prevent tampering. The changes didn't come without resistance. Some officers resigned in protest, while others reluctantly adapted. But the tide was turning, and Maya could feel the shift. 1 year after Parker's conviction, a public ceremony was held to honor the victims of police misconduct and to recognize the progress made toward reform. Maya sat in the crowd, unsure if she belonged there. When Marcus Harris took the stage to speak, she held her breath. "I stand here today as someone who has seen both the worst and the best of this city," Marcus said. "The worst was being treated like a criminal for no reason. The best is seeing people like Officer Collins stand up and say, 'No more.' It doesn't erase the past, but it gives me hope for the future." Maya felt a lump in her throat as the crowd erupted in applause. That evening, as she walked home, Maya received a text from Angela. "We're not there yet, but you're trying. That counts for something." For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Rebuilding trust was a slow, painful process, but she was finally beginning to believe it was possible, and she was determined to see it through. The morning sun bathed Riverview in a soft golden light as Officer Maya Collins prepared for her final day at the precinct. Her uniform hung neatly in her closet, untouched for weeks. Today wasn't about patrols or reports. It was about turning the page on a chapter of her life that had redefined who she was. The reforms she had helped bring to Riverview Police Department were now fully underway. Independent oversight boards were operational, body cam footage was no longer a matter of internal discretion, and community policing initiatives were beginning to take root. The once toxic culture of the precinct was being dismantled brick by brick. Yet for Maya, this progress came with a bittersweet realization. Her time as a police officer was over. As she walked into the precinct, Maya noticed the changes. The usual tension in the air had been replaced by something else, cautious optimism. Officers who once glared at her now nodded in acknowledgement, though some still avoided her altogether. "Collins," Sergeant Grant called out, waving her into his office. Maya stepped inside, taking a seat across from him. "I hear today's your last day," Grant said, leaning back in his chair. "It is," Maya confirmed, her voice steady. Grant nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've done good work here, Maya. More than most would have had the courage to do. I hope you know that." "Thank you, Sarge," Maya said. I hope it sticks." "It will," Grant assured her. "Change like this doesn't happen overnight, but the foundation's there, and you helped build it." As she stood to leave, Grant added, "Wherever you go next, don't lose that fire. We need more people like you." Later that afternoon, a small gathering was held in the precinct's community room. It wasn't a celebration, Maya had insisted on that, but a quiet acknowledgement of her departure. Agent Monica Torres was among those in attendance. She approached Maya, holding out a hand. "You made a difference, Collins," Torres said. "Not just here, but in every department we've uncovered because of your courage." Maya shook her hand. "It wasn't just me. It was everyone who stood up, who refused to stay silent." Torres smirked. "Don't sell yourself short. We wouldn't be here without you." As the gathering wound down, Marcus Harris entered the room, his sister Angela at his side. Conversations quieted as they walked toward Maya. Marcus extended a hand. "Officer Collins." Maya hesitated before taking his hand. "Marcus." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Marcus said, "You've done more than I ever thought you would. I still don't know if I can forgive what happened, but I respect what you've done since." Angela nodded. "You're not just talking about change, you're living it. That matters." "Thank you," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." That evening, Maya walked through the streets of Riverview one last time in her role as an officer. She passed the library where she had arrested Marcus, the convenience store where she had nearly followed Parker's playbook, and the community center where she had spoken at her first public forum. Every step felt like closing a loop, acknowledging the mistakes she had made and the progress that had come from them. The next day, Maya stood on the steps of the Riverview courthouse, speaking to a group of new recruits as part of a community outreach program. She wore a simple blazer instead of a uniform, her badge now a symbol of her past rather than her present. "Policing isn't about power," Maya told them. "It's about service. And the second you lose sight of the humanity of the people you're sworn to protect, you've already failed." The recruits listened intently, some nodding, others furrowing their brows as they absorbed her words. "In this line of work, you'll face pressure. Pressure to look the other way, to take shortcuts, to protect the badge at all costs. Don't. The badge isn't what makes you honorable. Your actions do." When she finished, one of the recruits raised a hand. "Do you think trust can really be rebuilt?" Maya considered the question carefully before answering. "Trust is fragile, and rebuilding it is hard. It takes time, effort, and accountability. But yes, I believe it can be done. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't." That evening, as Maya packed the last of her belongings into a moving box, she reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the young officer who had once admired her freshly polished badge in the mirror, eager to prove herself. That version of her was gone, replaced by someone who understood the weight of her actions and the responsibility of her choices. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Marcus Harris. "I hear you're leaving Riverview. Good luck, Maya. Keep making a difference." She smiled, typing back a quick response. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll do my best." As Maya drove out of Riverview, the city faded into the distance behind her. She didn't know exactly where her path would lead, but for the first time, she felt at peace with the uncertainty. She wasn't just leaving her old life behind. She was stepping into a new one, shaped by accountability, resilience, and the unshakable belief that change was possible. It wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning.